Okay, it is 7:05 according to the clock on the wall, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the City of Delaware Historic Preservation Commission meeting of February 28th, 2018. The first item on the agenda is a roll call. Have a roll call, please.
Mr. Coleman?
Present.
Mr. Nicely?
Here.
Ms. Riviera?
Here.
Ms. Van Gundy?
Here.
Councilman Rohr? Vice Chairman Hatton?
Here.
Chairman Koch?
Here. It is my understanding that Councilman Rohr called in ahead of time and advised us of his possible absence, and I'd like to have a motion to excuse him from the meeting.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Coleman.
Second.
A second by Mr. Hatton. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Nicely?
Yes.
Ms. Riviera?
Yes.
Ms. Van Gundy?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Hatton?
Yes.
Chairman Koch?
Yes. Item 2 on the regular meeting agenda is the approval of the motion summary of the Historic Preservation Commission meeting held on January 24th, 2018, as recorded and transcribed. Have you all had an opportunity to review the transcription, and do you have any corrections or additions? Hearing none, could I have a motion for approval of the motion summary of the January 24th, 2018 meeting?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Nicely and a second by Mr. Hatton.
Second by.
Oh, I'm sorry. Boy, not like me.
He and I tied
We
on
talked at the
motion,
same
but-
time.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll get it done, so.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Nicely?
Yes.
Ms. Riviera?
Yes.
Ms. Van Gundy?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Hatton?
Yes.
Chairman Koch?
Yes. Item 3A on the regular business agenda is item 2018-0272. It's a request by Bunn's Restaurant LLC for a certificate of appropriateness for reinstating storefront entrances at 49 North Sandusky Street, which is Zone B2 in the Central Business District and located in the Downtown Core Subdistrict of the Downtown Historic District Overlay. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, we do. As you had mentioned, the property site is at 49 North Sandusky Street. It is zoned B2, and it is located within the downtown core, and immediately to the west is the transitional district. And this is the aerial. And a brief history of the building. The building is listed as a contributing structure in the Sandusky Street National Register Historic District. It was actually built in 1850 by J. and I. Day. And the simple upper level construction is a clue to its early construction date. And the original cornice still remains intact. The storefront, however, has been modified over time and covered with modern materials. The first photograph we saw was taken in 1950, and by 1952, the storefront has been changed. And you can see the storefront is to the left of this photograph, which was provided by the Delaware County Historical Society. And the modification that had occurred, the modern aluminum 1950s storefront was installed. You can see that it is now the Singer Sewing Machine building. And the columns and transom windows and so forth have been completely removed. And there is a large sign band area over that transom window area. And in addition, an aluminum window frames and double entry doors were installed, and it is speculated that an interior staircase that led up to the second floor might have been removed at that time to open up the retail space and allow for the installation of those double doors. And then the next photograph that we had available was taken in 1999, where the storefront was again modified. And the double entry door was removed, and a single right-hand side entry door had been installed to increase the storefront window display area and the interior retail space. And this is the same design that we see today in 2018. And over the years, the storefront has held many various types of retail stores. And the most recent was Delaware Diamonds, which had moved to another location in 2017. And so the storefront is currently vacant. And the applicant who took ownership of the building in 2004 has taken this opportunity to rehabilitate the second floor into a future residential unit. And in order to gain access to that second floor, the interior stairway needed to be reinstated. And there was architectural evidence that, that stairway, was at the northern end of the store, where the entry doors were. And so with the construction of that interior stair, it leads right exactly to where the door to the retail space was. And so what the owner would like to do is to recreate a second entry into the retail space. And the reconstruction of the interior stair necessitated the construction of a fire-rated wall, to enclose that stairway. And so the existing storefront window glass would be cut back, and instead of an angled window, the display window would be cut at a 90-degree angle, and another entry door to the retail space be installed right next to it. And the applicant is requesting that the new entry door also be aluminum to match that existing door, and that the modifications of the storefront window glass also be done in aluminum, which is the materials that have been there. This would be a more cost-effective approach to make these modifications. And staff is supportive of the modification, which will not, vastly, change the appearance of the storefront. And the storefront modification does give a nod to the building's original design. And it will not detract any less from the historic fabric of the district than what has been in place for many years. The architectural standards do indicate when undertaking changes to a non-historic storefront that the new work be designed to reflect the historic character of the building. And aluminum cladding of replacement windows, should not be the milk finish or natural aluminum color, or the entry door itself should be at least 50% glazed, not more than 75. And the applicant, as I said, is requesting, an all aluminum entry door and window glass framing. The applicant is not in a position to perform a complete storefront modification right now to the original 1850s design. That may be further, down the road. But the modern storefront application from 1952, at 66 years of age, is now becoming somewhat historic. And to contain costs, the proposal appears to be the most practical and most cost-effective in this particular circumstance, while maintaining the general appearance of the building as it has appeared since 1950. And staff offers that the proposal presented is the most reasonable alternative that exists for this application, and would not be substantial enough to prevent any future modification to the original design. And so the applicant is here if commission has any questions.
Are there any commission member comments for questions for city staff?
Well, I will make one comment. In the staff analysis, the comment that the milled aluminum framing is now itself becoming historic. That's a stretch.
Yes.
If we were in a downtown that was built in 1952, I would say absolutely. But in an Italianate, a largely Italianate downtown, I don't think you can. To me, it's incongruous with not only this building's architecture, but with the overall downtown architecture. So I just, couldn't let that pass.
Thank you.
I'd actually underline it as well. So.
Okay.
Any questions for city staff? Any comments on the application? I have a comment on the application. I don't think this is appropriate for our historic district. Everyone else who has rebuilt a storefront like this for ostensibly the same reasons, including myself and several of my partners, have not taken this shortcut approach that furthers the life of a decidedly not historic aluminum storefront. Everyone else that has been faced with the same problem has rebuilt the storefront to mimic an earlier period, generally the original architecture. I don't like this. I don't like the solution, and I intend to vote against it.
Well, I guess I was also going to mention at some point, but since you've kind of gone down that road, as noted also in the staff analysis, the standards state that it shall be designed and constructed to reflect historic character of the building. Not should, not may, it's shall be. And that's pretty clear. And if we start making an exception with this building due to whatever economic considerations there are, that pretty much destroys that particular part of the standards in the future. So it is an issue that I think is very concerning. To me, it's essentially rewriting the standards.
So the question I have maybe more for the commission than staff, and I've been on the commission for a while now. I think one of the things that we always try and balance is renovation versus maintenance. Might be a stretch here, right? But I think that's really the tipping point. Is certainly we've had allowed people to kind of continue with that or do a repair or kind of maintenance, which may be stretched into a little bit more. Most of us have been involved with old houses, old buildings. We know oftentimes what those simple projects are never quite so simple. So we've seen that. I don't disagree with you guys. The one thing I would say, and I would love to see this redone, on the other side of the street, down on the first block, certainly we've had 3 storefronts, I think, off the top of my head, redone there in the last year. But on the other side of that, I can also say that there's really not much of a change going on here, right? We're kind of rounding a corner and adding a door. Is it what I would like? No. But is it also, it's not making a material change to that opening? In staff's comment, this will not preclude the renovation at a later date, where, let's face it, sometimes we have applications in front of us that I think do that, right? So this, to me, this doesn't do any additional harm, right? Which I think is important. So I'd like to hear from the applicant, but I look at this and I'm not sure, it's not what I would ideally like to see, but I'm not sure that we're creating any sort of precedent. I know we don't like to use that word all the time, but I understand what Mr. Coleman's saying. So that's kind of my thinking, that maybe this might be a little more along the lines of maintenance, slight upgrade versus renovation. My thoughts.
Any other commission comments?
Not yet.
Well, in that case, I'd like to invite the applicant to come forward, identify himself and his address, and join the discussion.
I'm Vasily Konstantinidis, the owner of Buns. Thank you for taking the time to go over this. I'm not expecting these things, I don't come here bothering anybody for little things like that. I already have approved architecture plans that you go into the 49 and then you make another door into the left. That is already, I can finish my project, whether you approve it or not. But, after the recommendations for, the people who work there, I took it to the extra step to see if I can put an extra door, because it makes sense as a business owner that the people have privacy. I'm going to put a couple of apartments upstairs because, housing is getting big in downtown. I don't see, the problem for that. I did go inside and spend a lot of money renovating. I took all the ceiling tiles down because I believe in history, and I'm exposing all the original ceiling tiles. I didn't have to do that. But, I'm putting the expense because I do like the old stuff. I don't have any other things to say. I thought it was very minimum to take 36 inches because it's already diagonal. It's not really going to change anything like I heard from you guys, but it's up to the committee.
I think my objection is just it perpetuates a 1950s aluminum, mill finish aluminum storefront that is incongruous with the rest of the historic district. And I can think of several buildings downtown that were faced with the same problem, same issue, reconnecting the stairs and adding another door, and they all found a way to comply with the existing architectural standards, and buildings look better, they fit the downtown better, and I can't support this.
I also can say half of the town is with aluminum down, it's not just the only building. A lot of vestibules are aluminum downtown. It's just for the cost, it's not for the purpose, just the door I'm adding, that's all.
We do allow aluminum, as you know, from your restaurant,
Yes.
but it can't be mill finished, so it has to be the architectural bronze, like when you redid your restaurant. So so it's not particularly the material, it's more the size, the scope, and the color, which is, so because the new storefronts, you continue to use that. Now the doors obviously don't meet the current regulations. Vasily, have you looked at, obviously you've done stuff at your restaurant, you've been here for a long time. I assume at some point you'd like to probably get this in line with the rest of the buildings because the market's going to dictate it, right? Have you looked at, as Roger said, kind of bringing it up to the current code? Have you even looked at the cost of that?
For this particular.
Yeah, for that storefront, to redo the storefront.
No, not really. I have not put a lot of time. This is just came just like that.
Okay,
I haven't done any research.
okay.
Right, and staff understood that future plans would be to bring that storefront, back to the 1850s.
Yes.
Future plans are
Future.
imaginary until there's drawings drawn and contractors selected, and I could have the greatest intentions in the world in an imaginary state, and there's no reason why it would ever happen again. This is an opportunity to do it at a time that it makes sense, in my humble opinion.
And I want to make sure I'm correct. You said your plan B, let's call it, would be stay with the one door. You'd walk into like a landing, you'd go upstairs to the apartments, you'd turn left.
Correct.
So you'd have another interior door. And that's more just a traffic situation,
Correct.
privacy.
You have apartments upstairs and then you have business
Right,
downstairs.
I understand that.
Go ahead, please.
If I could just make a comment, if you're putting residential apartments on the second floor, correct?
Correct.
You're gonna want a certain clientele to rent, have a certain rent per those apartments. Opening it up and having, you're doing a pretty big renovation, it's costing you a lot of money, obviously. As an agent and a realtor, showing those condos, or not condos, but loft apartments to someone wanting to possibly lease, maybe at that $1,500-$1,600 lease rent. I don't know what your cost is, but I know that's kind of the going rate downtown. I just think if you open yourself up to those renovations, you should just go ahead and plan to make it a really nice fit to the period of time, fascia out front, just because that's everyone's first view of that place where they're going to live. And I think that's just really important to probably have that drawn out and see what the cost would be, because I think that would really benefit your apartments and then the downtown. That's my comment.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I'll chime in, so Bonaneche. I have a question maybe for you or for city staff. I was thinking that I had recalled somewhere, and you can correct me if I'm not correct, but exterior doors that lead into residences, such as the second-story apartments, isn't there a requirement that there has to be some sort of a security rating on that door, that it couldn't be fully glass?
Well, from what I understand, this door would be a fully tempered glass.
Okay, and so that would fit the bill for that, okay.
And then, too, as, staff was understanding that, at this point, there is no door into the retail space.
Mhm.
And so at this point, it's needed. And based on, from, again, what staff understood of the economics of, the applicant, this would be the most cost-effective to keep the project going at this point without detracting from the historic fabric, or what's been in place since
But-
the 1950s.
But to clarify, if I could, from you, from the applicant, just one is, if I understood you correctly, you said that even if, regardless of what the decision tonight on this particular request, you're still able to put in a door inside the door that's on the left. There'd be a second door that would enter into the stairwell.
Yes.
And secondly, if I understood you correctly, you have not priced out the cost for a full renovation to bring it back into more of an historic standard. Is that correct?
Well, this is just the door. I mean, the windows, the exterior,
Okay.
will all gonna remain the same. We're not gonna change that, we're following the rules, the window doctor, the people who done projects downtown,
Mhm.
they're all working to give him projects. All this happened fast, the Delaware Diamonds got out not long ago.
Mhm.
But I did have my plans to do the stairway just because it made a lot of sense to me.
Okay.
To, nowadays the space downtown, it's a valuable space. I mean, I'm spending my money to renovate and put people downtown. I think that's a good reason to do the door, that's all.
Okay. All right, thanks.
You understand that this HPC has no authority or purview on interior changes. They're just talking about
I understand.
the facade and the storefront. Well, what is the pleasure of the commission?
I would just say that I'm still trying to go back in my mind over some other projects that we've had in front of us that maybe we have said no to, and I always hate to kind of call them out, but I guess it's public record. So the optometry kind of springs to mind, and we did say, hey, if you're going to go to that effort, we want it to meet standards. But that was a pretty, I don't want to say massive, but it was a pretty decent change. I think where I am having trouble maybe making up my mind is this is really from a sidewalk or street view. I'm pretty sure I could drive by that or walk by that and never know that anything changed. It's pretty minimal. Is it what I would like? No. But is it, again, it's not doing any harm. It's not a real big investment on your part. So I don't see that where it's kind of like, well, geez, I already spent X. I don't want to redo it. So I'm a little torn on this, but
Well,
Well, I
the
think
more that gets spent on doing
I
this
get it. I
plan,
get it.
the less likely
Right.
it's ever going to get.
But there's perfect world and there's the world in which we all live, and we've all done sort of things where all right, I'm going to spend $500 to get this done for a few years, even though I know I have to spend 5,000 later, and I'm throwing 500 away, but it gets through what you need. I'm running through it in my mind a little bit.
Well, I think the Vision Care project that you brought up was a good example though, because I think it really, the structural changes were probably no more.
But the aesthetic changes.
Well, the big change was painting the brick, but in terms of the changes to the windows and the doors, they were no more, I think, extensive than this, and yet, we did not allow that, so.
I think he was opening up the glass area quite a bit because he wanted to make that more of a display, if I remember right. But maybe I'm.
I think the big thing there was the paint, but.
Yeah.
But again, I think there was an instance where the structural changes weren't,
Right.
any more extensive than this, and, we didn't allow it.
There have been other cases, I can't even remember where now, but I know there have been other cases where we have not approved doors that are going to be 100% glazed either. For that very reason, we didn't want that to become a norm.
Right.
But a point you raised, though, in your case, I think it's a good one as well, because there's sort of a overarching question there, I guess a meta question we could talk about is what is historic? In a building that was built ostensibly in the 1850s, it was renovated in the 1950s, now 70 years ago. Do we want to go for an historic purism of its original look, or are we willing to accommodate historic consistency to allow something like a door that will match the rest of the existing storefront?
Well,
And that's the question.
I think one of the big issues, and Roger's already spoken, but I'll jump on that again, is as it is right now, there's more incentive leaving it. There'll be more incentive, for the current owner or for a future owner to make changes that are more in line with changes that we've encouraged throughout the downtown. Making this seemingly smaller change perpetuates the 1952 changes, conceivably could make them viable for forever. Whereas, I think not allowing that creates the incentive that if they ever want to install an additional exterior door, it's going to have to come in line with the standards. And again, the standards don't say should, they say shall conform to the historic character. So I don't think that's, to me, that's a pretty clear indication of what the standards are intended to do. And this doesn't do that. In fact, I think it's going to perpetuate the 1952 thing, and that'll never get changed. I'm not questioning your intentions, but I think it just makes it less likely for anybody to do that because it's less imperative once you make this modification.
And I would add one thing. On the very last page on the application, there are 6 criteria that are explicitly spelled out that say one of these 6 criteria need to be met in order for us to grant a variance or waiver from these standards for the architectural standards. And prior to speaking with the applicant, I thought possibly number 2, which refers to substantial economic burden. However, I would make the point that as the applicant mentions, there has been no pricing out of what the cost would be for a larger renovation of the storefront. Obviously, it would cost more, substantially more, but if we don't know what the comparison is, and the applicant hasn't done that either, respectfully, I think that makes it hard to make that argument.
This is the original store right here. That's what I'm doing.
That's not what you're doing.
That's what I'm doing.
That's,
I mean,
I would
as
be
far as
happy if you would recreate
As far as the
that.
doors, I mean, the windows are above missing, right?
I don't see a door on that photo that looks anything like the door you're going to reuse from the 50s or the door you're going to add to match the 50s door.
You're right.
I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm
I understand.
merely trying to explain my
understand.
recalcitrance. What is the pleasure of the commission?
Other comments?
Somebody want to make a motion?
All right, I'll make a motion. So I move for approval of request 2018-0272 brought before the Historic Preservation Commission as stated in the application.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Nicely, a second by Ms. Riviera. Are there any further discussion? Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Mr. Coleman,
No.
Mr. Nicely,
No.
Ms. Riviera,
Yes.
Ms. Van Gundy. No. Vice Chairman Hatton,
No.
Chairman Koch.
No. I'm sorry, Mr. Healy.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right.
Item 3B on the agenda is application 2015-1768. It's a request by 12 West Restaurant for a certificate of appropriateness for the existing temporary sidewalk vestibule to remain in place in the public right-of-way from October 1st through September 20th of each calendar year, September 30th, I'm sorry, of each calendar year for 12 West William Street, which is Zone B2 in the Central Business District, zoned and located in a transitional sub-district of the Downtown Historic District overlay. And we have a staff report.
Yes, sir. PowerPoint. Apologize for the delay. Okay. Yes, as you had mentioned, the project is located at 12 West William Street. The property is zoned B2, and it is located in the transitional sub-district of the historic overlay. And here is the aerial. And the applicant wishes to request an extension of allowing the sidewalk vestibule in the city right-of-way in front of his restaurant. And it is, as I said, it is located within the city right-of-way on a temporary revocable basis. And the timeline has been presented in the staff report. Original discussion began September 30th, 2015, with general comments requested from HPC. And the case was formally brought before HPC. It was actually on October 28th, 2015. And the applicant was allowed its installation on a temporary revocable basis within the confines of an approved patio permit until March 31st, 2016. At that time, the topic would be revisited. The applicant reappeared before HPC on April 27th, 2016, indicating positive results from the use of the vestibule, and requested a time extension for year-round use of the vestibule. And HPC granted a time extension until September 30th, on which date the temporary license would expire. And the applicant would reapply for the license and revocable sidewalk use permit for continued use of the vestibule. At the October 24, 2016 HPC meeting, during discussion of another of the applicant's projects, HPC had asked the applicant about the status of the sidewalk vestibule, and the applicant continued to report positive results. At a September 27th, 2017 HPC meeting, during the comments section, a discussion was held by HPC with Dave Evelyn, Director of Planning and Community Development, regarding sidewalk vestibules and the process to permit their use. And essentially, each application, which would have been minimal, would be judged individually on its unique circumstances against basic markers such as storefront size, installation within an approved enclosed patio area with designs and materials similar to the 12 West beta test. And staff felt that the beta test had been successful up to that point. The applicant consistently maintained a revocable sidewalk use permit with the appropriate liability insurance, inclusive of the patio seating area and the vestibule during 2016, 2017, and now 2018. And on January 24th, 2018, a request by the Flying Pig Ale House for a certificate of appropriateness for a temporary sidewalk vestibule for 12 South Sandusky was tabled until HPC could recommend standards or determine if vestibules would be continued in the downtown area. And staff was requested to notify 12 West that the beta test for sidewalk vestibules had terminated, and to remove the sidewalk vestibule until further notice. And the staff had wanted to afford the applicant the opportunity to request an extension and discuss the matter further. And he is here this evening. And staff had provided the previous reports from October 28th, 2015 and April 27, 2016 HPC meetings with all pertinent background information and research information that HPC had requested, as well as staff analysis. City staff felt that the beta test had been successful. There had been no complaints received about the vestibule. The vestibule remains to be in good repair and condition, and the applicant has continually maintained the required sidewalk permits and insurance. And city staff finds the applicant's arguments to maintain the vestibule in place to be compelling, and because of its temporary nature, with that revocable clause, staff finds that it does not detract from the historic fabric of the downtown district overall or at this location. And one notion conceived early in the process is the idea to require the removal of vestibules during the warmer months. Staff believes that this could be a reasonable condition, but discussion should be balanced against the additional damage or work to the sidewalk from the constant installing and removing of the vestibule against the arguments of this particular applicant's circumstances. Staff does recommend the approval of the request by 12 West Restaurant to extend the use of the existing temporary sidewalk vestibule to remain in place in the public right-of-way from October 1st through September 30th, with the conditions listed in the report. Other staff departments have reviewed the request with no negative comments, with it being in the city right-of-way. And the applicant is here this evening for any questions from the commission.
Are there any questions for city staff from commission members?
I had a question on the first page, last paragraph, second sentence. Staff was requested to notify 12 West Restaurant that the beta test for sidewalk vestibules is over and to remove the sidewalk vestibule until further notice. Who instructed staff to do that?
I'm sorry?
Who instructed? You say staff was instructed by whom?
By this commission
I
at the
don't-
last meeting.
I don't recall that. I recall that, as the notes mentioned, that we asked for the timeline, which you guys didn't have, and again, per our minutes, that Mr. Nicely recommended a working group, and that I said, we've been talking about this forever, seemingly, and haven't put together any sort of standards. But maybe I was sleeping, but I do not recall telling staff that they had to take that down. I think what we had asked staff to do was to come back and tell us what the expiration date was, because staff didn't know at the last meeting what the expiration date for the permit was. That's what I remember.
Well, I'll tell you though, in defense of the staff, I will say, I think it was a pretty wide-ranging conversation.
Right, no,
I started from that position.
I understand that.
think after we wrestled with, how do we come up with a standard, that's not arbitrary, that you can allow for one business and not another, I think we all kind of threw up our hands and said, this is not gonna.
Yeah, and
there's not gonna be a workable.
agree 100%. I just don't remember telling staff that remove the sidewalk vestibule until further notice. I do not remember those words coming from this commission. But
What I remember, I remember somebody, I think,
it
saying the
doesn't
beta
matter.
test is over. But I think at the same time, we had asked, does that mean now, or when does the current permit expire? I
right,
believe that was
that's exactly what I
the
remember.
combination
So
of the two, right?
maybe a fine point that kind of stuck out at me going, who said that? So anyway, that was one of my only questions.
Well, I think I have to be honest and say that architecturally, that vestibule does not bother me that much, because it's on a building that's had all its historic appearance covered with stucco, and it's basically a modernized building, and I don't see that vestibule is totally out of character with the architecture. My problem is, if we allow this vestibule that they've already spent money on and have used, and it has helped their business, if we allow this one, how do we say no to the Flying Pig or any other application for
Well, maybe it's
15 or 20 vestibules up and
maybe
down
it's time
Sandusky
to-
Street?
to come up with some other standards besides having a restaurant and having a patio permit. Perhaps it's time that we need to get together and be a little proactive. I've just walked because of the Arts Festival project I'm doing, I've walked through every single restaurant in town in the last week. And I think it would be quite easy to put a few more regulations in place, and it could eliminate, I would say, 95% of anybody applying for a vestibule. I think you could do something like the front door has to open up directly into the main dining area, which would eliminate places like the Backstretch, Thurman's, Typhoon. You could say that it has to have, on Sandusky, in the main streets, you'd have to have a recessed entry of X amount of inches, and the vestibule would have to be flush with the opening of the street. I mean, there's a lot of little things that I think would really eliminate a lot of the potential, a lot of precedents, but I think that's something we need to do.
I think we got to be careful though about tailoring a standard to specific businesses, or even, something that could appear to be, structured so that an existing structure, it's kind of tailored for that specific unique situation and nobody else's. Particularly if I were a restaurant owner, I would want one of these. I think if my neighbor's got one, why can't I have one? And I think we're getting to the point where, first of all, what's temporary? It's a structure that's been here for almost 3 years or 2.5 years, and there's no plan to ever remove it. Is it still temporary? I mean, it's made out of materials that are apparently temporary in nature, but it's permanently in that place. So I mean, it's basically the worst of both worlds. It's become a permanent fixture attached, to the facade of, a building downtown, and it's not made of permanent materials. And I think we have to be careful that, if we allow it for one business because of some, it's not on Sandusky Street, or it's not got X percent of its historic fabric, or it's got 0% of its historic facade fabric. So it's okay there. I think that to me seems like we're creating some arbitrary standards to allow one applicant to have this, and we're excluding another. And I don't think that's, frankly, I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's supportable. And I think the appearance of these structures, we've already had one other applicant, we've had one other inquiry, and I think as more of these appear, it's going to create a snowball effect, and pretty soon there's going to be no stopping this. There's going to be no putting this genie back into the bottle. And I don't think these are consistent with what the standards are aiming for downtown. And, frankly, I think it needs to be said that, this is a 19th century downtown. Part of the charm of this downtown is that it's got 19th century architecture. It's got a 19th century feel. It's got interesting architecture. Maybe not all the buildings are as interesting as the others, but that's part of the draw downtown. That's what makes it unique. And if we start tacking on temporary structures or semi-permanent structures, I think we lose something. So I think when you sign up to locate a business downtown, you have to consider the pros and the cons. One of the cons is parking sometimes is a challenge, although I think it's more of a perceived challenge than an actual challenge, but that's a con. It's still a con. One of the other cons is sometimes the floor layout's not optimal to a modern business. One of the other challenges is sometimes the entryway is not optimal in terms of the comfort of, patrons who are placed immediately up front. But that's a trade-off with being in a downtown historic area that's got a 19th century feel. And once we start adding more of these type structures, I think we're going to lose something. We're going to lose a lot of our historic character to mitigate issues that are just inherent with having a downtown that's got that historic character. So I think we really need to be careful about that. That's kind of where I'm at on this.
And go ahead.
Okay,
Nicely.
thank you. 2 points quickly. First, to Commissioner Rivera's point, and the critique of that, I think if we were to talk about creating standards for something such as this, I agree with the point that we cannot tailor them to an individual business. They have to start with the value that we place on historic preservation and the exceptions to that in the case of these temporary vestibules. To the bigger point I would like to make, at the last meeting on January 24th, I had suggested a possible compromise. Politics is the art of compromise. And that was going back to the original intent when this original beta test was put in place. And that was a temporary structure during the most severe winter months to mitigate the inherently cold drafts that were affecting customers on a select number of businesses probably throughout the downtown. And I finally I'm a geographer by training, and I finally get to pull up some of that information. When I looked, there are 3 months of the year where the average daily high temperature is in the 30s. It is December, January, and February. March, it's 48 degrees. By November, it's 51 degrees. And so I would like to suggest, and it goes beyond the scope of this application, but if we want to find some sort of a compromise that doesn't substantially corrupt the historic look for most of the year, but also is a nod to the realities of cold winter and the fact that it does drive businesses, clients away on some areas, we should, again, as I stated then, I think it would be prudent to revisit this idea of pulling together some sort of a commission to come up with standards that would be very limited in scope to just 3 months. And as Commissioner Rivera indicated, we could put in place standards that do the best we can to ensure these are not too garish, they're not too much in the face of the historic ethos of the downtown, while still being somewhat compassionate to the needs of our downtown businesses.
So,
Any other comments?
yeah, so first of all, I agree with Chairman Koch. This has been up long enough that honestly, I walk by it and don't think about it. Part of it's the color scheme. Part of it is, again, there's really no architectural, it sounds awful. There's no historic architectural value to the building, right? In this case, it doesn't bother me. What bothers me is all the other cases, as Mr. Coleman said. So I was the one, I've been pushing that we do something around this for a while with standards, but I will tell you, Mr. Nicely, the more I look into it, the more I don't know how to do that. Because a couple of things. One, to Mr. Rivera's thing, well, if the doors don't face or this or that, I'm concerned that we then have renovations that renovate based on that. Because to your point, I believe, and I said this last meeting, if I'm a business owner, I am lining up for this. Absolutely. Why wouldn't I? But as I said, as a business owner, I also want a giant neon sign. I want plague lights, and I want to tear down the building on either side of me to build a parking lot, right? So we have to temper what we all want because, you know, like I said, if I'm a business owner, I absolutely want that. This, let's be perfectly clear. This is free square footage for their business on a city sidewalk that they don't pay for, they don't pay taxes on, or anything else. Now, people will push back and say, well, what about the sidewalk patios? Absolutely the same thing. What the sidewalk patios do, and I think we all have seen this, is it's for the greater good. It creates activity in the downtown. It brings life outside of the buildings. I don't know that there's anybody, other than on First Friday when people trip over the different ones. I hear people complaining about the sidewalk patios. But other than that, I think the sidewalk patios have been a fantastic success. But to me, this is different. It's addressing, as Mr. Coleman said, I get it. I go to your place. Nobody likes to sit by the door, but I've been in the back of 1808 and gotten cold too. And I do go to OPA. I know this, not Vasily, Genty, thank you, put up, air draft curtain, something like that. And it's, I was kind of talking to him about it. It works pretty well. Is it perfect? No. Is it technology that helps us address this issue? Yes. And I also talked to him a little bit just based on our others. Those can be run off a regular household circuit if they don't have a high wattage heater with them. So if you want a high wattage heater, then you're probably going to have to run on like a 20 amp circuit dedicated, but that was last week or last month. I go back and forth on this. I don't mind it here, but like everybody else, I have a really hard time saying it's okay for these folks and nobody else. And I don't want to see them up and down Sandusky. They will not fit in to the Italianate architecture. The two that have been in front of us, one informal and one an actual applicant, I don't think looked good. Man, if you twisted my arm and said they were there from December to the end of February, maybe, but that's still, it's 25% of the year. And as somebody pointed out, you get enough of these and it starts to look like it's a temporary construction entrance. It just isn't what we've been doing. So that's my wide rambling thoughts.
At this point, I'd like to invite the applicant to come forward and join the conversation. If you could identify yourself, your name and your address for the recorded record, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, David DeStefano, owner of 12 West, 12 West William Street, Delaware.
So how did you name the place?
Right? That came about actually because of our menu, truly. But listening to your comments, I appreciate what you're all trying to accomplish and taking into consideration what we're trying to balance on our end. It's a very difficult business. I would say a couple things. I think the vestibule does serve the greater good because it does impact, as I've mentioned in my notes or my paragraph, the number of people who use it, especially senior citizens, just from waiting for their customers to pick them up and they're not blocking other customers. They feel comfortable. The traffic that we deal with, the noise pollution.
But that's your customers, not the greater good. I mean,
well, when I think greater good, I think of if my customers are happy, that impacts Delaware as a whole. If they like coming in, I'm part of Delaware, correct?
Sure.
So part of my customers, part of Son of Thurman, whomever else, all of us are the downtown community. I'm one part of it, but I am part of it. This is just my opinion, but I don't think people are going to be lining up to get these. I don't see the value of, like next door, I'm building the barbecue place. I don't have a need for a vestibule there, and I'm not going to spend $5,000 on a product that I don't really need. It's a tough enough business. I could be wrong, just one person's opinion. I don't think people, if they don't need it, we've got enough problems dealing with, equipment, staff, competition, all these things. Unless I really need it, that's typically what we do in this business. If it's a need, we do it. So those are just my two comments.
Well, it would seem that obviously people do need it, and that's why they've come in front of us, which is why we're all here. And I think that's great that you have factored this in with your new place, and that was a little bit of pushback on our previous applicant who had a brand new rebuild and obviously didn't factor it in. And I think that was one of the concerns that we had, was that if we're going to allow these, people won't do what you did, right? Because you probably spend more than $5,000 building it into your new build, maybe, but apparently, because we had this conversation with the previous applicant and it was economic. And so they found it cheaper to come later and ask for a vestibule than to design it in.
Yeah, not too many new builds downtown.
So. Well, new storefronts, right?
I'm just referring to 14 West.
Right. Yeah. So I think that, we can own, it's hard to project, right? But that's unfortunately what we have to do. And based on where we're seeing, and you're the only one up right now, and it does kind of blend in. So it isn't like it jumps out. So I don't know, but I know from talking with some other business owners that there's interest. And so we've had two in front of us and we will have more.
And so, it's been in front of us for 3 years. And over 3 years, we've got yours. We've had one formal application, one informal application. So that's one a year. So not that it will necessarily trend one a year for the next 10 years, but if it did, now you got, now you got 13 of these, so and things like this, I think sometimes, there becomes a tipping point or where something just kind of gains momentum and it becomes, that's the thing to have downtown. So I think, nobody can predict whether or not this thing, would turn into 3, you and the other 2 individuals that have expressed interest, or 15. We don't know. We can't know. I mean,
Yeah, you agree. You can't know one way or the other.
But the thing is, what we got to be careful of is, having a precedent or having an arbitrary decision that, essentially allows it for one business. And then all of a sudden we close the gate and say, no more. And I don't think you can do that. If we don't have consistency, then, this whole thing is indefensible. Everything we do is indefensible. And I think we've got to be consistent. And I think this opens the door for the potential that we're going to, that we create the potential to dramatically change the downtown streetscape and not for the better.
I am inclined to agree with you, Mr. Coleman. Are there any other commission discussion, comments, questions? Questions for the applicant, questions for city staff?
Would HPC consider an extension on a temporary basis, for a certain number of months? Would that work for the applicant instead of a year-round basis? Because as I said, city is, agreeable to having the vestibule in the city right of way on a revocable permit. So if there's any way to come to a compromise.
Is the compromise nothing or something? I'd like to have it all year round. I wish I didn't have it. I'd rather not have a vestibule. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. I mean, this is, to take it down for 3 months, is it rain, wind, other elements? Yeah, are there days where it's not necessary? Sure. But the cost factor involved in putting it up and putting it down, I mean, I think we looked at taking it down a couple years ago when I was here for the first renewal, and I think it's $500 every time. So
thus it's become, a permanent structure.
Right.
And I think that's, one of the concerns. I mean, and that's not the only concern, and that's not even necessarily a major
And
concern.
I agree. I just don't see it as a dramatic change. We did our best to blend in.
Yeah, and I don't take anything away from that. I think, in terms of what you did with what you've got, you guys did a great job with it. And again, if this were the only one downtown and there was never going to be an issue of this coming up again, personally, I mean, it wouldn't be as concerning, but I think we're opening a can of worms that, I just don't think we can arbitrarily say yes to you and no to somebody else.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's enough, I don't think there are enough mitigating factors for you that somebody else couldn't, also use. I think it's either we allow it or we don't allow it. And if we allow it, we open the floodgates potentially to many more of these. And that's a real concern.
And
I think,
I was just going to say, just to be clear, because we do have some people on the commission right there, we were very clear when you guys came in front of us with the plans that this was temporary. And I know I asked the question, hey, this is a beta test. Beta tests don't always go the way you want or the way people expect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And are you guys willing to gamble with that and maybe have to take this thing back down and put it in storage or put it on Craigslist, right? And I know we were very clear on that because I knew it wasn't an inconsequential investment. And so, I just want to make sure everybody knows we were very clear on that.
yeah, no disagreement there.
Okay.
What is the wish of the commission?
I interrupted you. Did you?
Uh,
I'm sorry.
I lost my train of thought.
Okay, I apologize.
That's all right.
I have a procedural question. As far as making motions for the approval, does that come before any requested amendments to the staff recommendations, or would those come first?
You can,
I honestly
you can
cannot
make a
remember.
motion based on what's in front and
Yeah.
attach changes. We do that a lot.
Yeah, that's true. That would work.
If I could, I remembered what I was going to say. I know it's a challenge to come up with. No one's asking. All of us agree. Like I said, all of us. I think most of the restaurant folks downtown agree. You can't. No one's asking to write the rules for one particular restaurant. But I do think it's worth investing time to come up with possible regulations that do fit. And maybe it takes a certain amount of time to come up with that. But I think it's worth pursuing. With the growing downtown community as Delaware is, it's continues to go in that manner, which we all appreciate. I think these are kind of obstacles that will have to be addressed, and I think this one is well worth it. It's a tough challenge, I get it.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing, but I think it's worth hopefully coming up with some regulations that can address it.
Okay.
Oh, no, I think I know why the
Okay.
public is here.
Okay.
Is there anyone in the public that wants to make a comment on this particular application? I thought,
My role as vice chair. See, there you go.
I would like to.
oh, would you please come forward and identify yourself and your address? And
Okay. Hi, I'm Roxanne Amadon, 161 West Winter Street. Love your business. Love the work you do. I would just like to say, listening to this, I think it's important that for the evolution of the downtown, that it makes sense to take a little time to evaluate different choices. I think inbound vestibules and other things like that might be wise to take a moment and pay attention to. I think Sherry's ideas of just taking a minute and thinking about it makes sense. So I just wanted to share that perspective.
thank you for your comment. One of the commissioners care to make a motion regarding this application?
Mr. Nicely.
I would, although thinking more about the previous question I had about amendments, I think I should make a motion for an amendment first so that we can vote on that, because otherwise we're not really voting on the same thing. So if I could, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to first make a move to amend staff recommendation number 2, which currently reads, including for the time period of October 1st through September 30th of each year. I would like to strike that and instead say for the time period beginning December 1st and ending February 28th or 29th of each year, comma.
I'm gonna make it March 1st to make it easier.
We could. If we would like to change that, make it March 1st of each year, comma. Would be easier. So that's my motion, is to adopt that amendment number
You're
2.
making a motion to change staff condition number 2
That is correct.
on this application. Is there a second to Mr. Nicely's motion? I don't hear a second, Mr. Nicely.
I concede that point.
Oh,
I'll second.
Ms. Riviera has seconded the motion. Point of clarification before we vote on this. Does this affect only this application, or would this affect all future applications for vestibules?
I suppose that would be up to city staff to determine. My understanding is it simply refers to this particular application.
That would be my thinking.
Okay.
It's the application that's in front of us tonight.
Right.
so.
That's my
Mr. Nicely's
assumption.
correction or addition for an amendment is for this application, HPC 2015-1768 only. We have a motion and a second, Ms. Riviera. Any further discussion?
Yeah, so a question then, what is the status in, as the motion's been put forth, what is the status of the vestibule prior to December 1st, 2018? Does it come down and then go back up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be that's what you mean, right?
Yeah, I would assume as this is what's before us now, so.
I think if that's what we're looking at voting on, I would suggest that we allow it to remain in place through the end of March to allow time to make arrangements to have it taken down in a professional manner.
Yeah,
And
that's a
then,
good point.
and then they can be reinstalled December 1st.
You're
I will-
suggesting a change in Mr. Nicely's nomination for an amendment. Is that acceptable to Mr.
And yeah,
Nicely?
and I believe that is the procedure. And yes, I will amend my request amendment to read through March 30th of 2018.
Is that,
But every
Or should say-
subsequent year would be,
Right, we should say, right. We should say through March 1st of every year, parenthesis,
with the exception.
with a 30-day grace period in the year 2018 for dismantlement of the vestibule. Close parenthesis.
is that alteration of the proposed amendment acceptable to the second?
Yes.
Can I make a comment before the vote?
Sure.
So this is new. So if we're talking about removing that vestibule by the end of the month and then March, it will negatively impact my business.
By the beginning of March, I think is what's suggested.
Okay, I thought you said.
March
Well,
1st.
this year would be March 30th.
30th.
So 30 days.
Never mind.
That will
Normally March 1st.
That will negatively impact my business. There are no two ways that will impact our business activity.
It will impact your business less than if you don't have one, though, I think is,
If that's the way you want to do,
I
yes,
think
sir.
that's what he's trying to get to.
I'd rather not negatively impact it at
Right, I
all.
understand that.
May I
Understood.
say something?
Yes.
This is something that really bothers me. I look at our commission, and I think we should work with the city, with code, and I think we have an obligation to work with the merchants downtown, too. It's wonderful to have the desire to have a perfect historical downtown. If we have nobody that can stay in business because they're constantly struggling because of weather or unforeseen things that they didn't know when they were starting their business. I know personally it's very easy to start a business, but then after that, every day it's a struggle. Every week it's a struggle to stay in business. And sometimes I don't think we work with the merchants. We're like an adversary because we want everything perfect. They want to stay in business, and we don't seem to be able to come together.
Well, I would disagree. I think we actually are striving to find a middle ground. I think part of the success of downtown has been because of the work that the
I agree.
HBC and the city has done to not only conserve, but to also improve, the downtown over the last 20 years. And I think to suggest that, we don't, try to reach across and find ways to not only follow the standards, but also to work with the local merchants and to try to foster an environment that is conducive to business. I don't agree with that. I think that's,
Well, I agree, we've done very important work. I mean, I have only been on this commission 3 years, but what you've done before has been commendable. But also, people have to stay in business, and sometimes I think we don't quite look at that, because sometimes I see when applicants come here and they're asking for something, maybe new technology or just a different idea, I think what they're not saying is, I have a problem in my business and I'm thinking this might help me a little bit. And sometimes I think we slam the door on them
And-
because we're purists up here. And I agree. I think the rules and everything are wonderful, but sometimes I think,
So a couple of things around that. One, this is just an overlay of zoning, right? It is not a living, breathing thing. It's a set of standards, and we are tasked with following those standards. And as someone pointed out, there are 6 guidelines. So none of this really should be all that subjective. Most everything we do is pretty objective. Now, the reason that we even have this board is to provide variances, right? But again, 6 clear standards, and the standards, no offense to what you just said, nothing in what you just said is in our standards or in the variances. We have a responsibility to follow these. One of the things that I always try to do, and it's really hard, it's a small town. I eat at his restaurant. I eat at the restaurant that was here before. I patronize these businesses, and it's really hard to take the emotion out of it. And that's absolutely what we have to do. I'm not trying to be argumentative, but everything you said is exactly wrong. Our purpose is not to help individuals and businesses. That would absolutely be wrong. Our purpose as by the city charter is to do exactly what's in the standards. And if we vary from those standards, to follow these 6 reasons. So I get frustrated when we deviate from that and start talking about, I think this would look nice. As I said, what you have up there looks great. That's not one of the standards, okay? So I will push back very hard, obviously, on that and say we, I think, as an organization, need to rein ourselves in and focus more on what the city charter and city council has given us the purview over. And sometimes I think we get way too far off task. That's my thought.
Okay.
But we do have a motion.
Elaine, could you read the motion that we're about to vote on?
We have a motion to amend staff recommendation number 2 in application 2015-1768 to strike out the time frame to state for the time period of December 1st through March 1st of each year, with a 30-day grace period of 2018 only to allow for dismemberment. Does that sound about right?
That's acceptable, sure. Thank you.
Is dismemberment the best word we can come up with?
Dismantlement, maybe.
I
Or
believe that was
how
what
about
was said, but I can.
removal?
Maybe removal would be a better word. Sounds not quite so brutal.
That sounds kind of gruesome.
Yeah.
We'll switch it to removal.
Thank
That's
you.
the deal.
Is everybody clear on the vote we're about to take? Is there any further discussion? Could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. Nicely,
Yes.
Ms. Riviera,
Yes.
Ms. Van Gundy,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Hatton,
No.
Chairman Coke.
No. I would say that passed. Okay. Now, could we clarify how we're going to vote on this application? I'm not clear. We've just amended what we're going to vote on. What is it that we are voting on now?
For the application as amended.
As amended.
You would just say that, as amended,
Okay.
unless you're going to add additional amendments.
Okay, we're about to vote on request 2015-1768. It's a request by 12 West to essentially to leave up their beta test vestibule as of the dates in the amendment. Is that correct?
Just say as amended.
In perpetuity going forward.
Yes.
Correct.
Where this is a vote to
Permanent.
allow the vestibule to remain, with the only change being that we have made it a temporary installation for
Season.
90 days each year. Any further discussion?
Can I ask for clarification? So you're saying it would only allow to be up for 90 days? Is that correct?
December 1st to March 1st.
You know, I'd just like to say, for someone who appreciates what you all do, I've done the best I can. I mean, including 14 West Williams, to draw and build that particular building. I don't believe this is very dramatic. I think this needs addressed. I think we should, I think there ought to be, I don't know, committee, something put together, because this is, I don't know what the percent, 10% of that storefront, or that building front, and it serves a valuable purpose. Next door, I've invested in downtown Delaware. That empty lot sat vacant for 24 months. It was an abandoned building, and it was an eyesore. I don't ask for much, and I'm telling you, this is important to my business. And it may not pass those 6 standards, but it should be addressed in those 6 standards somehow. I'd like to feel like I've given, and this would be this is a negative. And I've given, I try to appreciate what you guys are doing, but I don't look at this as dramatic. People come to downtown because we've got new businesses coming downtown. We've got new restaurants and eateries and shops, businesses coming. And I think that the architectural history is a benefits from that because people can see it. But there are certain things that need to be done so we can continue to draw people.
And staff would like to remind the applicant that you are allowed to appeal the decision of the Historic Preservation Commission to City Council
Okay.
within 30 days of the decision, if you so choose.
If it passes, that's what I would have to do. This is too important to our business. And like I said, for just me speaking selfishly here before, I think I've done enough to contribute to have this at least considered to figure out a solution. And I disagree with the current solution that was come up with tonight of 90 days. There's inclement weather much greater out of 365 days a year beyond the 90. So.
I just wanted to add, just based on this conversation, one of the reasons that these standards are in place and why these 6 variances are in place is to take out exactly what you've just talked about. Because we can't weigh in, you contribute more to downtown than this other person.
I didn't say anybody else.
But that's really what you're getting. And what I'm saying is, again, part of this whole process is to take out that subjectivity.
So can I ask a
Right?
question on the point?
Sure, sure.
Who does make the change then? Who does vary the standards if you want them altered as time goes forward?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Like you're saying there are these 6 standards. And
Right.
Your job is to not be subjective, be objective.
No, there's a thick book of standards.
So who
These
has-
are the,
I'm sorry, so if you were to make changes to those standards, who has that authority?
city council.
Okay.
No, it generally bubbles up from us, if you will. It tends not to go down. That's not really their subject matter, right? So, but there are 6 criteria that at least one of the 6 has to be met to grant a variance. And city council's bound by these same set of regulations that we are. That doesn't mean they won't interpret it differently. But what I'm trying to point out is why those are there are to prevent me from saying, man, I eat lunch at 12 West. I love that place. I get it. It's cool. Then let me finish. Versus, I was in this other place and they were very nice to me. It's trying to get away from the good old boy smoke-filled back room that everybody thinks is politics, right? So it's clearly defined so that it takes that subjectivity out of it and makes it more objective. So my comment to you would be, if you're going to appeal this to city council, I would look at that application and focus on those, because that's what I feel like that's what hasn't been met tonight. And so they're going to look at that same criteria. They may interpret it completely differently, but that's, they're under the same focus that we are. So
If I could add to that, just to the bigger point, I think Mr. Hatton and Mr. Coleman both have made some excellent points and very good observations, and they're very persuasive in my mind to the bigger issue of trying as best we can not to be subjective. I mean, I've always brought that up in meetings. These 6 reasons for granting a variance, for example, are very important because it lends us credibility. In this particular application, and why I sought the amendment for that is because I think it does meet 2 of the criteria. One being substantial economic burden. A second being that it has little or no historical or architectural significance because it is in the transitional sub-district. It is a non-conforming building already. for all intents and purposes. And so I actually tend to agree with both of you and the other people on the commission that we need to be very careful to make sure we maintain that veil of objectivity and that we don't allow our mission to creep beyond what we are mandated to do by the city in the charter. But that said, I think in this particular application, there could be an argument made in favor of supporting it.
Right.
If I could just echo what you said in terms of the economic impact, that's the only reason, my main reason to oppose the 90 days is because it impacts, just opening the door alone for a few seconds impacts 10%, 10 customers, 10 seats, 6 right there, and the 4 at the bar. We only have 40 seats. So that's 25% of our seats. So it is a significant impact to our business.
And really what that's written more around is if you have, and we don't really have that down here, but if you have a slate roof and it's going to cost you $100,000 to replace the slate roof. If you have copper gutters, we're not going to make you put up $60,000 worth of copper gutters when there's other materials that would look and feel the same. So that's really, it's not really designed for your business, if you will. It's more around the renovation and upkeep of the building. So I understand what you're saying, but that's not really what this focus is. I'll grant you the property has little or no historic or architectural significance, and that's one of the things that we have talked about. The difficulty there is, out of everything on here, that's probably the most subjective, right?
True.
And that's where, it's a public meeting, so I don't think I'm talking out of school, where our last applicant that we said no said, then I want that other one torn down. And that's very real. So I know you're saying you don't think a lot of people want these. I think they will. And
I don't think a lot will. I'm not saying none won't.
right. But if, in my mind, it kind of has to be all or nothing. I have a really hard time telling her, no, you're okay. And that's what this is really designed to keep us from doing, right? If there's not something that I can go back to her, she can certainly say the same economic things that you've talked about, the same weather, the weather's the same. It's really all around what we want, what the standards dictate for downtown. And the standards don't allow for that, right? Period. So that's clear cut. So anything that we would allow beyond that would be a variance. Once you get into that variance, if it's not clear in those 6 standards, it's very difficult for us to say yes to you, no to her, no to the other folks, and no to the ones that are coming down the pike.
Right. I think also it's worth pointing out that first standard regarding the economics, that's basically that there would be substantial economic reduction
Right.
applying the standard. Applying the standard would have said you never put that up in the first place. So if you go back to, the starting point, applying the standard and not allowing you to put that up would not have changed the economics of the situation. And so I think that's worth pointing out as well.
And to answer the applicant's question on how the standards are revised or changed or upgraded over time, the commission and city staff could put together, potential standards for, such as a vestibule or any other type of improvement that might want to be put in the downtown. And those would be presenting to the planning commission for approval. And if it passes that approval, then it goes to city council for approval. And then the zoning code is actually amended and they're incorporated into the codified ordinances.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are hearing, if I hear no other discussion, we are voting, we're about to, if someone makes a motion, we are about to vote on whether 12 West can keep their vestibule up from December 1st to March 1st every year in perpetuity from now on. That's essentially what we're voting on.
There's a-
I question that. It would still be a conditional renewable.
Revocable site law.
Right.
Revocable.
So it's not in perpetuity per se.
Thank you. Right.
All right. I'll make that motion. If
What
we're ready.
motion do you make?
I'm going to. I would like to move for the approval of Quest 2015-1768, request by 12 West Restaurant for certificate of appropriateness as amended.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Nicely, a second by Ms. Riviera. Is there any further discussion? If not, call the roll, please.
Mr. Coleman,
No.
Mr. Nicely,
Yes.
Ms. Riviera,
Yes.
Ms. Van Gundy,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Hatton,
No.
Chairman Koch.
No. We have a 3-3, and it requires 4 votes to pass. So the application does not pass. Dave, thank you for enduring this. Thank you for running a restaurant in town that most everybody likes.
So I'm clear, so it didn't pass then?
It did not pass.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good night.
Thanks for coming. Item 3C on the agenda is the previously tabled motion from the last meeting, 2018-0086. It's a request by the Flying Pig Ale House for a certificate of appropriateness for a temporary sidewalk vestibule for 12 South Sandusky Street, which is Zone B2 in the Central Business District and located in the downtown core subdistrict of the Downtown Historic District overlay. This item was tabled on January 24th, 2018.
Chairman Hatton, we received information immediately, right before this meeting started. Flying Pig is under new general management. So they would like to have this case remain on the table until they can come forward with a better plan as they're moving along with making some other changes.
Okay, so as I understand it, the request is to continue this as a tabled motion. Do we need to take a vote on that?
It stays on the
It's
table
on
unless
the
we vote
table.
about
I don't believe we need to. If we do, we can always add it back on, and they're talking about possibly this summer, I believe he said.
Right, he said June or July.
Right.
In July,
They may
bringing
come
forward
back.
plans and bringing the case back.
But from a point of order, we don't need a motion to leave it on the table. We'd only need a motion to take it off.
No. Okay, so it stays tabled. Item 4 on the agenda is staff comments. Are there any?
No, we can work together on putting together some type of standards for vestibules. We had talked about general parameters in the past. And if you have any additional suggestions on what you would like to see, you can email those to Dave Eflin and see what we can put together.
Yeah, and for the record, staff has inquired of other Central Ohio or
Other
wherever historic districts on whether or not standards exist and has found no such standards.
Not in the public right of way. They're only allowed on private properties. And I had looked at zoning codes of Troy and Worcester and Cambridge, and they allow seating areas and patio areas like we do, as well as the sandwich boards signs, but I have not seen any references to vestibules.
So in not approving vestibules, we're not being apparently any more onerous in our standards than other similar historic districts.
Correct.
Okay.
So again, clearly my memory isn't always as sharp as it should be, but I thought we left the last meeting with this exact same discussion and basically not instructing them to move forward because it seemed like the flavor
Was to
not have. So that's what surprised me when I saw staff recommended. It kind of just seems like there's a disconnect on a lot of our communications. So I don't think we're instructing staff to do anything
Okay.
unless someone wants to.
That's my understanding.
That was my understanding last meeting.
That was
too.
that was what we decided, I think,
Right.
as a group.
Okay.
Okay, moving on. Number 5, commission member comments and discussion. I would like to start that off with
Could I
a,
ask one quick question, because I know this is probably going to take a little bit of time,
Yeah.
which it deserves, and I just have one quick question for city staff. I saw in the paper that the Cohatch has signed a lease for the old Gazette building. So I guess the quick question I've got is, has that been, I guess is the understanding then that that is not going to impact the Italian 8 house next door as previously?
That's what I'm understanding. It's being contained in the Gazette.
Right. So they were able to find a way to make that space work without impacting the property next door.
From what I'm understanding, but I'll look into that further.
let me go first.
I did have one quick question for city staff, following up on our main.
I just said, I think I'd like to lead this off with my observation and
Good.
discussions.
That's true. I will take a back seat. I will let you go first.
I am about to raise the issue. Unfortunately, the Gazette reporter has just left. I would like to raise the issue reported on the above the fold headline with photo on the Delaware Gazette of Tuesday, February 27th, where the county has announced that they are going to offer up the historic jail and sheriff's residence for sale. I would like to read my statement into the record on that, and I will distribute copies when I finish. This is the HPC comments and discussion, February 28th, 2018. I would like to address the headline story in yesterday's Delaware Gazette, Historic Jail for Sale. Like many of the people in the community I have spoken to in the last 24 hours, I am sickened by the disappointing decision of our county commissioners to abandon their responsibility to preserve and safeguard our historic county buildings. They have decided to offer up our magnificent 1878 county sheriff's residence and jail for sale to the highest bidder, presumably to do with as the new owner pleases. This marvelous building is a significant part of one of the most beautiful, visible, and most historic county courthouse complexes in the state, built with enormous pride by the Delaware County government during the second half of the 19th century. This was Delaware's most exciting and prolific period of growth when many of our most cherished historic buildings and residences were built. Selling this historic portion of county government to private owners would allow virtually unrestricted demolition and/or reconstruction to serve any private purpose. With that in mind, I would like the city planning staff to explore and investigate the possibility of extending the downtown Delaware Historic District to include any new parcel that would be platted to accommodate the sale of the historic sheriff's residence into private ownership. The existing boundary of the historic district currently includes the adjacent properties on the south side of Central Avenue, directly across the street from the historic county sheriff's residence. This would be a minor adjustment in the boundary of the historic district, but might well save one of the most beautiful and visible historic buildings in the community from destruction. And I will distribute copies of my comments to the commission and to the city.
Roger, we do have, our chairman, we do have a copy
between William Street and Franklin Street are included in the district, are they not?
This is it, right?
Yes.
Do you want me to put it up on the
Yes.
screen?
Thank you.
Can you give me a few minutes?
Yes.
So,
Now, I think maybe with the clerk gone, we should probably not have discussion.
Yeah.
For a couple minutes.
Get a drink of water then.
That's right. Yeah, I brought both papers because that was the same thing as if we're going to paint murals on our building. Yeah. And apparently the city's like, yeah. We've been waiting for that. Shocks you. Yeah. Well, not so much the mayor, but the city managers. So,
I think they did.
No one can look like it.
No. I think that's a poorly worded reference to moving.
It says you would be in a
Sure. Because to me, that's always the thing, right? Well, we don't want to tear it down. Someone will move it.
And no one, I think they're just trying to get it out from under their responsibility and budget.
I think they want it level and parking.
Yeah, I agree.
Really?
Well, remember, they've got a parking ramp going in, which they probably looked at, it's gonna be, once again, $60,000 a square parking space. Or we can mow this thing down and, you know, a third of the parking spaces for $100 a spot or something, right?
It's a neat building that needs work. That would suggest using some of the tools in Delaware County Finance.
Someone else is trying to.
I've seen a lot worse.
Well, that building has been worse. They've put money into it.
Yeah, they stabilized the road.
And,
5 years ago.
Green the roof. Sure.
I mean, there's like take place currently for that building for our schools.
Okay.
I think all
Like
the
that,
place
right?
to moving stuff is.
So that
moving
is-
County law members out of the building.
So it is protected.
Are you able to read that?
Yeah.
Is it clear?
Thank you, Elaine. The county's announcement that they are planning on selling this building to anybody that might want to make a bid on it disturbs me greatly. I think it's, well, as I stated in my statement, I think it's one of the most visible and beautiful buildings in town, and I cannot imagine how they could abdicate their responsibility like that. Are there commission member comments that follow mine?
Yes, there is. I would just simply like to add into the record my statement of wholly endorsing what you just read and your comments regarding, Chairman's comments regarding this decision to put up the historic jail for purchase. And I would say on the 7 years that I've been on this commission, I have found that the county commissioners have consistently shown a very blatant disregard for the historic fabric of the city of Delaware. And it's something that I can increasingly find very disturbing when case after case we see similar kinds of actions on their part. And I think it's a sad statement in a county that is one of the fastest growing and most prosperous counties in our country when we have commissioners that act this way, when they know that it is going to potentially go against the interests of the flagship city of the county.
Is already in the downtown core of the historic district. And as such, if it comes into private hands, or I guess even if it doesn't, we do have purview over exterior changes in that building.
Yeah, and I would wonder if we might not have more influence on it. Just, throwing this out there, the county, kind of consistent with what Chairman Nicely said, has kind of, pressured us to accept certain changes downtown that we were not entirely comfortable with. The Elks Lodge, the Butler House. If that were in private hands, that leverage goes away because the private owner's not going to have as much leverage as the county, I would think.
So, also, as we went through the new building across the street and the other things, one of the things that's always been held over our head, it felt a little more stick than carrot, was that what they're going to do with the renovation of the old courthouse and that facility there, and any money they spend across the street, they won't be able to spend there. So there's been a lot of dangling this out. I was talking offline with the chairman. I guess you can read this a couple of ways, and I'm trying to be optimistic, but my concern is this feels very much like the start of let's demolish it, because, hey, we tried to get somebody to buy it, nobody wanted to buy it. I think of, that's kind of gone through with Willis. I think we're going to probably cross that bridge with where the city staff was on Washington, that building there, one of the old schools, where everybody's like, well, it's costs a lot of money to maintain, and we put it up for bid, nobody really wanted it. One of the other concerns, it would be a great restaurant, B&B, whatever, where are you going to park? Because the county is strapped for parking, so you're not going to get any parking with the purchase of that parcel. It just feels to me like, let's start the process of justifying how in a couple of years we're going to tear this down.
It's demolition by neglect, as we've called it. It's demolition by neglect,
Yes.
as we've called it in the past.
Yes.
Our-
I wanted to add also that the story does say that they had a joint session February 15th with the city of Delaware. So I'm disappointed our council rep isn't here, because I was hoping to kind of get some insight, because
That's why.
so hopefully we can maybe reach out to our city manager, mayor, council rep, and see if we can get some more information.
I think there are members in the audience, members of the community that might want to address this issue. Is there anybody here that would care to go on record with any comments on this subject? Would you please come forward and identify yourself, give your address, and let us have the benefit of your views.
Charlton Amadon, 161 West Winter Street. I would add, my greatest fear is exactly what Mr. Hatton just displayed concern about, is that this is the overall plan for things going on. Now, I've heard after some things that I did in social media that we've been given some reassurances that that isn't the case, but I'm still, after what happened with the other buildings that we've been discussing downtown, I just don't have any faith in what our county commissioners are capable of. I think they've not shown, even though this is a different group per se, I just can't bring myself to trust them yet. So I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else? I'm not seeing a great rush towards the microphone.
I would recommend, thanks for coming, but I would recommend going to the city council meeting, because to me, you're preaching to the choir here, as you probably know. I would like you know, I would like to know what was discussed at the February 15th meeting and what the city's role in that. Do you guys have any insight into that?
I mean, it's online.
Okay.
The meeting was recorded, it's on YouTube,
Okay.
just like every meeting, so.
I have a 30-second attention span like
Well,
everybody else.
Unfortunately, so do I. Go ahead. No, I wanted to say a lot of things. Okay.
You identify yourself?
Again.
Again, Roxanne Amadon, 161 West Winter. So I was surprised by the story, as many of us were. I reached out to Tom Holman as a result of that. He suggested that he was also surprised. However, when I watched the video of the county commissioners' discussion, which I posted on Facebook so people could look at that as well, it did communicate that there was a joint meeting where this topic was broached, and the idea was presented as that it would be a kind of building that would be enthusiastically purchased, and that they hoped for somebody to go do that. Dave Hemanowski, I can never say his name, has reached out to all of the county commissioners and has posted a lengthy summary of his perspective out on Facebook for those of you who have or have not seen it. I still think there's a lot of discussion to be had with this. The thing that I'm alarmed about is that that we learned about it yesterday, and the bids have to be done by April 5th. That is, what, 30 days from now, 35 days from now? And the property is listed on the auditor's site as a $1.1 million piece of property. I don't know anybody around that has that kind of money right now just to suddenly be able to, except for Roger perhaps, to in 30 days to be able to make an informed bid. So it feels like there is some sort of insincerity to the desire to have a bid. So I too will be reaching out to each of the county commissioners to understand the perspective. I'm meeting with Dave tomorrow, and the Northwest Neighborhood Association will be taking a position on this, whether that has a bearing or not. But we advocated for other buildings to be saved in the past, and it met deaf ears. So I applaud you leaning in and helping make this important save. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Thanks.
I guess I would like an exploration by city staff of how significant that property's inclusion into the existing downtown core of the downtown historic district overlay, and what control that may or may not give this body in what happens to that building. So
I would argue that, in my mind, that it's clearly the second most significant public building in our city, with the courthouse being the first.
historic building.
Yes. Well,
I agree. This may be one of the few, if maybe the last, I haven't done recent research, but there were several of these combination sheriff's residence and city jails built in various counties in Ohio. And the last time I checked, there were only 2 left, and ours was one of them. And ours is in pretty good condition.
Right.
In my mind, the building is very sound. It's got a brand new roof on it. It's quite solid. It needs some mechanical infrastructure additions, I'm sure, but I'm going to be mad as a hornet if the result is that they're headed for potential demolition. Any other comments under commission member comments and discussion?
not on that. I had 2 days worth of papers that I brought because the Monday paper was facelifts in store for the city AWU's executive director on a mission to change buildings' walls to works of art. I won't go into it. It was not terribly specific other than the photo that they have, which I don't know my addresses, but it's the one on the corner next to the old bus depot. Down there, whatever,
Would be 44 South
which
Sandusky
is Olivina now, so. And that billboard is grandfathered in. It's got a couple of things. When Diamonds owned that building, it had a nice Welcome to Historic Delaware sign, and then I think it had a Verizon sign last time I looked, but now it's nothing. But we've talked about murals here before in this body. And for me, the buildings themselves are art, and anything else, to use a hackneyed phrase, is putting flames on a Ferrari, right? When what you have is so artistic, you don't put pinstripes and flames and stuff on it, right? You do that on your Mustang or something. No offense to Mustang guys. And granted, this wall that they happen to be showing is not great, but I also think of the wall on the corner of where Barley Hopsters is now, which used to be a horrific monolith that they've done, a pretty nice job with. They certainly, it's not, you can only do so much, right? But, we have ghost signs. We've talked around those. To me, public murals and the sort of things are great for freeway overpasses. And that, literally that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to increase Jersey, a huge slab of concrete, right? And we don't have that downtown. And I know people will point to Bucyrus, and Bucyrus has some neat murals that they spent loads of money on, and still has done. I have friends in Bucyrus, so I'm up there. Bucyrus, as I always say, Bucyrus doesn't have a parking problem, right? Downtown. So but I am concerned that it seems like both city staff, both our city manager and our mayor were just over the moon with this. With the mayor said, bringing art to downtown Delaware has certainly been a long time coming. I think it's very exciting. Our city manager termed it a win-win. And again, we've got the Boardman site, which I think is a fantastic opportunity. There are other places, but our historic buildings is not it. If we want to do public sculptures on the sidewalks, all in favor of that, but hands off our downtown buildings.
Agreed.
I can add a little bit of additional background on that particular locale on 44 South Sandusky. That is not the side of the building. That is an old billboard that was installed there many years ago.
You're talking about this up here, not the whole, but the whole side of the building.
Well, the whole side of the building's been stuccoed.
Right. This
is this black thing is an old billboard. And most recently, I serve on the design committee of the Main Street Delaware organization. And we have been in talks with Main Street and the Ross Art Museum at Ohio Wesleyan and a couple of other entities about creating a message on that particular billboard that would be a three-way message welcoming people to historic downtown Delaware and recognizing Olivina and Main Street. Olivina has, by way of their lease with the building, the property owner, Olivina has priority over that billboard is part of their lease, and they're allowed to use it for a commercial Olivina sign. Off-street signage, advertising signage is not allowed in Delaware, or off-site, I should say. But an Olivina ad would not be off-site signage or advertising. So the lease that Olivina has with the property owner entitles them to use that for advertising.
Which is why we ended up with the Verizon sign up there.
Right. And previously, when the building was in separate, or the previous ownership, there was a welcome to historic downtown Delaware sign on there.
You heard me say all that, right?
No, I wasn't listening.
You're not listening again.
Anyway, that's just some background.
Right. And so my concern is it's pretty ambiguous what they're talking about. It seems like they're talking about walls, they're talking about murals. That I'm absolutely not in favor of. Now, if Ross Art wants to put, I don't know, Jackson Pollock up there, and then next month put Roy Lichtenstein or something, I'm in favor of that, but not on the whole wall. And not kind of community art. Once again, art's a little bit like singing. We can all sing, but not everybody can sing well. Right?
Well, now, remember that we, as part of the architectural standards, we have a standard that prohibits painting previously unpainted historic surfaces. So I'm not sure that applies to stucco from the 2000 decade.
It's older than aluminum, milled aluminum framing.
I do believe in today's paper, there was a small disclaimer, if you will, from Ohio Wesleyan stating something about no buildings, no
Okay, good.
sites have been
I did not
Even-
read today's paper.
discussed
Okay,
yet,
good.
that they're just sort of in the very beginning stages of talking
All
about
right,
this.
good.
So that kind of leads to the next question.
Future.
Should we figure out a way through city staff to maybe communicate our concerns to the people that are involved in this project, just to, so they don't go down a rabbit hole in terms of coming up with a grand design for an area that we would have purview over not allowing to be painted.
I don't think there's any problem with you saying that.
Do you get that?
Right, yeah, you can put your comments together and send them to Dave Eflin.
The Main Street Design Committee is the one that, as far as I know, first started talking about making some kind of use of that billboard, that existing nasty-looking blank billboard right
Yeah, I
now.
don't think there's not, I mean, I don't speak for anybody else. I personally don't have any problem with the billboard. It's the thought of the
Right.
whole side of that building being, turned into a work of art.
They're talking about
Things, yeah.
walls at the Strand and a few other things in there. That's what got me thinking of that. So,
Well,
If they're interior
Yeah.
walls, I don't care.
Yeah, that says, it wouldn't hurt, allow business owners to do something inside on their walls if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing, how you see downtown, most downtowns now have like the angel wings, they have them low, and people come and take pictures and post
The
it.
school has that.
So I think that's probably what Westland's probably talking about. It's like the new rage that people are
I've
doing.
missed the angel wing range.
Oh,
Smith
yeah.
Elementary has some.
Yeah, so Smith is on Park there with the whole
Yeah.
angel wing thing. So I think that's where Westland's coming with that idea of people taking pictures of the art, behind them,
Right.
kind of thing. But I think bring it inside the doors of the businesses, that would be appealing to them.
Yeah.
You know?
There you go, more traffic.
Yeah.
Put it in the windows, the temporary.
okay, Diane, if you convey the message from your end, and I will convey that next time we have a Main Street Design Committee meeting. Are there any other comments from commission members or discussion?
Somebody leave a jacket on.
Hearing none, I think I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Our next regular meeting will be on March 28th, 2018. I have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second from Mr. Nicely. A motion by Mr. Haddon. That makes us adjourn. Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
thanks, everybody.